If Doctor Who wasn't axed in the year 1989, what would have happened? Well, a number of things would have happened which you can follow on my YouTube series, which I highly advise you to do. But in the year 2008, a spin-off would have launched called Panopticon, which would have followed on from season 41, 42 and 43 of Doctor Who, and featured Timothy Dalton as the Rogue. Sit back and watch the manipulations of the Panopticon. Series 3 of Panopticon would have aired between the 17th of April 2010 to the 5th of June 2010 over 8-hour-long episodes. Originally, Series 3 was supposed to, like Series 1 and 2, contain 6-hour-long episodes. However, Doctor Who Vengeance, which was released 2 months earlier on the 12th of February, raised a few issues. Firstly, the events in Doctor Who Vengeance were pretty significant to the future Panopticon, and without watching Doctor Who Vengeance, a viewer might be pretty confused as to what's going on in Panopticon. So, it was decided that Panopticon would get an extra 2 episodes at the start of the series, which would be called Vengeance Part 1 and Part 2, which would re-edit Doctor Who Vengeance into 2 Panopticon episodes, which also would cut down Vengeance from 2 hours 30 minutes to 2 hours split into 2 halves. A lot of the stuff that focused more on the Doctor and co is cut out, and more of the action is centred around the Rogue and President Gregory. With the first 2 episodes covered already in Doctor Who Vengeance, click the card to watch it. I won't cover Vengeance Part 1 and 2, but instead I'll just dive straight into the other 6 episodes in the series. Behind the scenes, production was in turmoil. David Richardson had left at the end of the previous season, and a new showrunner needed to be found. Mark Platt had already announced his departure as script editor at the end of the season, and the whole Julie Gardner controversy still affected the production staff profoundly. Stephen Bear decided to step in and fix the problem. He rung up Ronald D. Moore, a long-time collaborator of him from his start at Deep Space Nine days, and also a frequent writer on Doctor Who since 2002. Bear asked Moore to come onto Panopticon, however Moore was currently busy finishing up his acclaimed science fiction television series Battlestar Galactica and starting up the Galactica spin-off Caprica. He could have managed with writing 1 episode a year for Who, but showrunning Panopticon while also dealing with these shows would be a difficult task. So Moore said to Bear that he would come on as showrunner for Series 4 of Panopticon when Battlestar is completely over and Caprica is up and running for another producer to take over completely as showrunner, with his supervision for its planned Season 2. Note: Caprica was cancelled after only 1 season. But in the meantime, for Series 3 of Panopticon, there was a situation where there was no showrunner. So as a last resort, Stephen Bear decided to step in, for this season only, with Moore taking over the next season. Bear, being good friends with Moore, coordinated with him and script editor Mark Platt to try and make the most cohesive season possible and trying to make it fit snugly into the Panopticon tapestry. As Stephen Bear would be the chief executive producer for the season, a producer who worked on the floor would need to be selected. In the end, Rebel Zero producer Phil Collinson was asked to come on for the season and produce it. The cast for the season would be different as well. They're comprised of existing cast members: Timothy Dalton as the Rogue, Siobhan Redmond as Riley, David Tennant as Will Adams, Christopher Biggins as Francis, Claire Higgins as Ahelia, and Cameron Gillan as Kendra. However, 2 new cast members would be added in, introduced in Vengeance. Vita Capaldi as Gregory, the acting president of Gallifrey, and Emma Caulfield as Cordell, his chief of staff. Katrina Olsen would be written out in episode 3 of the series, and John Leeson would have stayed on as the voice of K9 but in a much more reduced role, with K9 only showing it once or twice in the whole season. The title sequence would be largely the same, but with the names different to fit the cast changes. Episodes 1 and 2 would have featured and special guest star Patterson Joseph as the Doctor credit on the titles. So, without further ado, let's dive into episodes 3 to 8 of Panopticon Series 3. It's been a week since Gregory was sworn in as acting Lord President of Gallifrey, and the presidential election race has officially begun. Gregory and the Rani are gearing up to win this election. Meanwhile, the Rogue is working on trying to find a vice president. However, a larger threat is looming over them, and are they too caught up in their own politics to even notice its existence? This episode, like most Panopticon season openers, sets the scene for the season and doesn't delve too much into the main plot of the series. We mainly focus on Gregory and the Rogue as they now have equal focus and we follow both their stories. It's a politically driven episode which also established the main enemies of the season, who were teased at the end of season 2, the Vex. An interdimensional race on an equal stage of societal development as the Time Lords. However, only the Rogue knows their existence after being informed by Francis of intelligence about their existence and an apparent intention to invade Gallifrey. Gregory and Cordell are developed heavily in this episode, and we see them winning over the support of the Gallifreyan people slowly. Leela organises a trip for the students of the Academy to the Medusa Cascade, the site of one of the most famous battles in Gallifreyan recent history. However, a dormant threat lies there, and Leela and the students must fight for their own survival, cut off from the Alliance. Meanwhile on Gallifrey, the Rogue has to come to terms with perhaps losing the presidency and his planet. This episode follows Leela and the students from the Academy, including Will and Kendra, as they go on a school trip to the Medusa Cascade to visit the site of the so-called final battle from the Rebels Era episode For the Good, which Leela in fact fought in. However, when they arrive, they are ambushed by an unknown alien race and cut off from all communication. Most of this episode plays out like a disaster movie, with the ship half destroyed and Leela and the others fighting their way through the destroyed ship. The final act of this episode shows Leela, Will and Kendra ending up in the ship that attacked them and finding it completely empty apart from flying glowing dust particles everywhere, not even many controls. Eventually, some of the particles come together to form one person, who replicates Leela in every shape and form. She tells them that they are the Vex, and this is a warning to them, and that they shall take the Alliance eventually, and now they must go home and tell them to prepare for war. Then the body dissipates back into particles, and Leela, Will and Kendra and the rest of the survivors find themselves back on the ship, as good as new, heading home for Gallifrey. Leela theorises that if they can replicate her, they can replicate anyone, and anyone could be one of them. Meanwhile, we focus back on Gallifrey following the story of the Rogue and Gregory as the presidential race continues on. The Rogue visits the Rani to try and appeal to her to reconsider going on the ticket with Gregory, as he believes they would work best together. However, the Rani is torn between the two of them and she has to make a decision pretty quickly, or her entire future could be at stake. This episode focuses on the Rani and a decision about where her loyalties lie. This is probably the most political of the episodes this season, as we follow the Rani throughout her political life, from making speeches in the Panopticon to public appearances to her double dealing with Gregory and the Rogue. The catalyst for everything is the news of the Vex, and that's what the interviews and speeches and debates focus on. Eventually, the Rani comes to a decision and decides to stay with Gregory, much to the Rogue's dismay, as he is not yet to find a possible vice president to run with him in the presidential race. Gregory invites the Vex for an official peace summit with the Alliance of Planets to try and build bridges, but also boost his public opinion. However, not all goes well, as the Vex are far more than Gregory anticipated them to be. This episode brings back the focus to the Vex, and we see Gregory invite a delegation to Gallifrey for a peace summit. Leela warns them that the Vex are just out to invade Gallifrey and that this is a bad idea, and the Rogue agrees with her. However, the Vex arrive and they have taken humanoid form, however unique forms, and are not just replicating the person in front of them as they did with Leela. However, the peace summit goes badly and Gregory is completely embarrassed by the Vex and also by the Rogue, but because of this, the media portray the Rogue negatively as he's presented as siding with the enemy. At the end of the conference, the leader of the delegation warns Gregory that they will be coming and they should be ready. A virus is released into the Citadel, rendering every Time Lord and Time Lady unconscious. However, before long they all wake up and to everyone else's horror, they are not quite themselves. The Matrix copies of every single dead Time Lord has been transplanted into the bodies of every living Time Lord in the Citadel, and it's now up to the Academy students and the Outsiders to try and reverse the effects, as well as overcoming the emotional repercussion of interacting with their dead loved ones. This episode is the most standalone of all this season and focuses mostly on Will, Kendra, Leela and the Outsiders as they save the day after all the Time Lords have got dead Time Lords implanted within them. For example, the Rogue has the Keeper, Gregory has Andred, which makes for a very emotional scene with Leela and Kendra. The Varney has Perusa, and Francis has the Prophet. Interestingly though, for some unknown reason, Cordell is not affected, but she does help reverse the virus with the others. Most of this episode focuses on characters and not too much story. At the end of the episode, the Rogue tells Will that in light of recent events and his work at the Academy, he's putting Will up for early graduation, and over the next year he will start his transition into mentally and biologically becoming a Time Lord. Gregory is notified that an unidentified ship is coming to Gallifreyan space. However, when communication is made, he realises it's his old friend, Lieutenant Fassel. It's not long until Gregory invites Fassel to join him in his political quest. However, Cordell informs Gregory of a possible spy in the midst and accuses Fassel. Now Gregory has to deal with Cordell, Fassel, the Varney, the Rogue and the Vex, and all not being completely honest. However, will any of them take the fall, or will it be someone innocent in the end, on the wrong end of the stick? This episode rounds off the season by reintroducing Doctor Who recurring character Lieutenant Fassel into Panopticon. We find that he is actually an old friend of Gregory as he helped Gregory out when he was lost in space. Gregory never trusted the Varney and asked whether Fassel would consider becoming his vice president. Fassel agrees, however there is news of a possible spy and Fassel is suspected. Leela is asked by the Rogue to visit the New Bellons colony and try and dig up some dirt on Fassel. Leela asks Kendra and Will with her. There they are ambushed by a legion of Vex and captured. Then we focus on Leela, Kendra and Will escaping and Fassel eventually being proven innocent. However, Gregory announces Fassel as his vice president candidate without telling the Varney, and the Varney finds out when Gregory gives his speech in the Panopticon. The Varney is furious and leaves Gallifrey and runs off to Miasmagoria, saying that she's had enough. When Leela, Kendra and Will manage to steal a Vex ship to get off New Bellons, they are found by a Vex, and as they try and get onto the ship, they shoot Leela, and she falls to the ground dead. Kendra runs over to her, but is stopped by a Vex, who tells her that the same will happen to her. He then takes Kendra and Will onto the ship and tells them that they're going back to the mothership. Then there's a session of the Panopticon, Gregory's going away, and a transmission appears on the screen of Leela's body strung up with Kendra and Will next to it. Kendra reads out that the Time Lords must surrender to the Vex, or they would die. Gregory goes up to the screen and asks, who are the Vex? Who can he speak to? Who are the representatives? And a Vex comes onto screen and says, we are the Vex. We live in the Vex sphere. We are divided into 6 different districts. Each one has a representative. You can talk to each one of these representatives. Gregory asks their names, and the Vex speaks. Garnet, Eriwick, Osmers, Priex, Ale, and Cordell. And then cut to end credits. And the season ends. So there you have it. Season 3 of Panopticon. A vital season which bridges the gap between the feel of the first 2 seasons and the new regime which will be led by Ronald D. Moore for season 4 onwards. This season achieved the show's highest ratings, getting close to those of Doctor Who usually gets, and in the case of episode 8, even matching Doctor Who's average rating. This convinced CBS and the BBC to give Panopticon a bigger budget going forwards. Anyway, that's it for now. Until next time, which is season 47. Goodbye.